If you want to get jacked and strong as a grappler or a combat sports athlete, this is the full programming guide using a science-based approach. First thing I want to get out of the way is plyos, sprints, and power output movements such as Olympic lifts or modified Olympic lifts are great. However, they're not in high demand for our sport, specifically in grappling, and MMA much more. So it's going to take a larger percentage of your training volume, given the demand in MMA, than it will for grappling. So if I was going to structure a session for MMA, I would start with a plyo warm-up, same thing with grappling, plyo warm-up, one power movement, in the same programming style that I'm about to give you. And then if I was in MMA, I'd probably sprint first, then do my lifting. But to be honest, we're not sprinting in MMA like we are in football or basketball, so you could throw it at the end of the session. It's kind of up to you depending on the adaptations you're seeking to gain. All right, now let's go into the lifting programming side of things. So the first thing we need to realize as an athlete is fatigue management actually is an extremely important variable that you need to take into consideration to ensure that you can train your sport maximally. All right, so let's look at our weekly blueprints. I would say 2 days of lifting per week is probably going to give you about 70% of the return on investment that 3 or 4 will. It has less of a time commitment, but the problem is we're giving up a whole training day. So you need to ask yourself, do I really need the strength and conditioning programming as much as somebody else? So if you've been lifting for your whole life, you're super strong, maybe you came from a strongman, powerlifting, bodybuilding background, whatever it may be, and you're already really strong, and maybe you're already really powerful, you already have some pop and bounce from those plyometrics, maybe you need less days of strength and conditioning, but maybe you're heavily undertrained and you simply just need the strength and conditioning more than somebody else. Maybe you lean towards 3 or 4. I always recommend 3 or 4. One, I love lifting, but also I think that 3 or 4 gets you to that 100% return on investment. And if we program it in a way that's a little bit more intelligent, taking into account fatigue and volume/load management, then I think we can get the absolute best bang for our buck without interfering with our training. The first thing to take into consideration as well when we go to actually put this blueprint together is I recommend lifting before training. I think that lifting before training allows you to still do your sport maximally. I don't think lifting, especially with the way that we're going to program it, interferes with it, but lifting after super intense cardio is really difficult, and we're going to struggle to make progress in the gym, and progressive overload is the name of the game. Second thing is we're going to hit all muscle groups and movement patterns, say chest, but then the movement pattern of a horizontal press 2 to 3 times a week. I would say 2 at a bare minimum, 3 if we really want to emphasize that muscle group or movement pattern. But to be honest, the muscle growth studies that we've seen doesn't really seem to gain any more additional benefit from frequency between 2 and 3, but I do think there's a benefit of the sort of coordination or neurological training you get or adaptation you get by getting really good at a specific movement. If I want to get really good at bench pressing to then in the long run get a bigger chest and stronger horizontal press, maybe a higher frequency might be better. But in terms of just raw muscle growth, probably 2 times frequency for a muscle group is sufficient. Second thing, rep range. Now, this is a suggestion. It is not set in stone, but I think aiming for it when you put the weight on the bar, which is going to dictate your rep range, and once again, it could be bar, machine, cable, dumbbell, doesn't matter. But it's going to dictate the weight that's on whatever implement you're using. And it's also going to have a major impact on our fatigue. Higher reps are more fatiguing and lower reps are less fatiguing. I know that's counterintuitive, but that's just the way it is in terms of calcium ion buildup in the muscle. So doing a set of 50 push-ups might give you the same stimulus as a set of 5 heavy dips or 5 heavy bench. But the problem is you are more fatigued. Your actual chest takes longer to recover, more hours, more sleeps to recover, and then hit it hard again. So we want to err on the side of a rep range, in my opinion, between 4 to 10 with 0 to 1 rep in reserve, and honestly 1 rep or 2 reps in reserve might be better, but I do believe that we get a lot of benefit from pushing ourselves in the gym and training to 0 reps in reserve for certain periods of time. And what I mean by reps in reserve is 2 reps in reserve would be 2 reps short of failure. So if I put on the bar, let's say for bench press, 315, I can do that for 5 reps to failure. That's my max. 2 reps in reserve would be 3. So I go, can I stay in the rep range? Maybe I do 305, shoot for 7, and get 5. See how the weight dictates or the rep range in the sense of, or rather the opposite, the rep range dictates the weight that's on the implement. Now, next, total weekly volume for any individual muscle group, and I'm going to say this for muscle groups because movement patterns can have multiple muscle groups as part of that movement pattern. Say for a squat, a deadlift, some variation of a hinge, whatever that may be, is going to have multiple muscle group working in that movement. So I'm going to say total weekly volume for any individual muscle group should be around 10 to 12 sets, but keep in mind compound movements can hit multiple at a time, and now we're getting into fractional. That's not something I think that you need to overly worry about, but it's something to take into consideration in terms of recovery. So when you go to assess whether or not 10 to 12 is a good total weekly volume, is push it up a little bit. See if you still progress. If you still progress, then you are at a recoverable volume. I say 10 to 12 because it's a general rule of thumb, but just like the rep range, if you get 12 reps or 13 reps, not a big deal, increase the weight, jump back into the rep range. Same thing with your weekly volume for any individual muscle group. Say you do 14 sets of biceps and you're like, well, I progressed all my movements, then you're good. Let's say you do 15 sets of chest and you didn't progress on anything or even regressed too much. So that's a good indicator. Next, rest periods should be 3 minutes. The idea of the gym is we're not going in to break a sweat or get fit. That strength conditioning is separate. We can cover that in a separate video. But the idea in the gym is to seek strength, power adaptations. And that is best done by being fully recovered and attacking straight sets. What I mean by straight sets is not doing things like intensifiers, drop sets, rest, pause. If we understand how motor unit recruitment works, given that the maximal amount of motor units we can recruit is when we are well recovered and well rested, it makes no sense to get to our end of our set and reduce the weight, reduce the motor unit recruitment, and attack that set with no rest and get a worse set. Now, I know you're going to get a way sicker pump, and I know it's going to be a cooler feeling and a cooler look, and drop sets are super fun, but they're not particularly effective when we understand that the drivers of muscle growth and therefore strength, which I'll cover in a second, is mechanical tension and motor unit recruitment. Motor unit recruitment being high effort and mechanical tension being when load is placed on those muscle fibers. Given that we are high motor unit recruitment, we have a involuntary slowing of contraction velocity. What I mean by muscle growth drives strength is you can gain strength without gaining muscle, but you cannot gain muscle without gaining strength. Why? Because the early adaptations of strength come from coordination, getting good at a movement, neural adaptation, being able to recruit more motor units by doing that activity, being better at the movement. But at a certain point, you're going to hit a wall and you're not going to be able to do more with the current motor units and muscle fibers that you have on your body, and we need to add contractile tissue. That happens together in tandem, strength and muscle growth together, but this idea that we can have some sort of empty muscle or putting on muscle is a bad thing is ridiculous. Stop worrying about that. Now, that is our weekly blueprint, and I'll break it down one more time. 3 day or 4 day, and I would recommend probably a full body or 4 day upper lower, so 3 days of full body, or even 3 days of upper lower full body, so we're still getting that 2 times frequency, and then 4 day, an upper lower split, so upper lower rest, or 2 days of full body if you are already strong or maybe just a beginner. So I'll say 3 or 4, preferable 2. Reiterating the same time, we're hitting muscle groups at least 2 times a week. Rep range 4 to 10. It's a suggestion. It's okay. Don't overthink it. Reps in reserve 0 to 2. Err on the side of a little bit less, not going to failure to spare us from some of that fatigue. And then 3 minutes of rest between sets to be fully recovered to attack each set. No intensifiers, no drop sets, just straight sets. And then around recoverable volume, maybe 10 to 12 sets per muscle, 10 to 12 sets per muscle group per week. That's our weekly blueprint. Here's our session blueprint. Total session volume is probably optimal. Once again, I'm going to say probably. These aren't set in stone. There's gray area here. Around 12 total effective sets. So let's say that could be 6 exercises, 2 sets apiece, 5 exercises, 2, maybe a 3. You can figure out the math. All right. So exercise order of that individual session should be Muscle groups that are lagging or what you want to prioritize, same thing with movement patterns, are going to be front loaded. So if we want to maximize our squat progression, or we want to bring up, say, our chest, those need to go in the front of the session order. And it's literally just a descending list of prioritization. So whatever is at the top, the first things that you do in the gym are going to be the most prioritized, descending down to the lowest prioritization. That is our session blueprint. So here is the notes that I left in some of these notes that I wrote out for myself that I do think are important to cover. So I'm going to retouch on the 4 topics you should know in terms of the Dummy's Guide to General Strength Training. One is motor unit recruitment, which I already talked about. High effort from the muscle requires proper loading of that target muscle, and things like instability or hypercomplex movements, or things with a poor loading structure, like a lot of functional stuff, just simply detract from motor unit recruitment. And we end up, the more specific you get, and this is once again a separate video entirely, but the more specific we get, the more that detracts from motor unit recruitment, and you fall somewhere in this mediocre middle where we're not getting strong and we're not practicing our sport super specific, just doing general strength training movements is over here on the adaptations. So by trying to do both at the same time, we just end up in this mediocre middle and everything sucks. Second one, mechanical tension is the involuntary slowing of reps due to high force on the muscle. So voluntarily slowing it is not mechanical tension. Now, 2 things that I hear a lot. Coordination is task specific. What I mean by this is you actually have to practice your sport to get better at being coordinated at your sport. Doing any movement, let's say juggling or balancing on a balance beam, is coordination specific to that task. If it was broad, it could go across sports. Whoever had the best hand-eye coordination and juggled really well would also be good at basketball, but shooting a basketball is task specific in terms of coordination. So stop thinking like that. Second one is, or fourth one in this list, is stability. Now, stability matters. It's just not trained by instability. What do I mean by that? Stabilizing muscles are trained by loading them directly. So if I'm doing a bench press, my stabilizing muscles are my lats on the bench, but I'm not training my lats by bench pressing. It's important to be stable on the bench, but it's not trained by being unstable. In fact, it detracts from motor unit recruitment. So you might have way less weight doing an unstable movement, and once again, we end up in the mediocre middle. I think some things that I would like to cover too is we don't need to have this dogma around any given or specific movement. Whether it be powerlifting, calisthenics, barbells, dumbbells, cables, machines, they all fall into a pool or a tool belt that we can use and just pick the best one, right? Let's think about fundamental movement patterns is, I think, the closing thing that I want to send you guys home with here is push and pull horizontally and vertically. Hinge, do a squat, rotate a little bit, some spinal flexion for the abs, do some plyos, some power, some sprints, and get fit and conditioned for your sport. What I mean by that is now let's just fill all of those things in with the best tools. So I'll just give you a couple. Vertical pull. Oh, I don't know, weighted pull-ups. Horizontal push. I don't know, bench press, a chest press. Doesn't really matter. A hinge, RDL, deadlift, dumbbell RDL. Doesn't really matter. So just pick the best tool for whatever fits you, your goals, your body, what you're good at. Don't get hurt, right? But it doesn't have to be dogmatic. We don't have to use, oh, powerlifting is the best, strongman is the best, calisthenics are the best. Don't think like that. Just pick the best tool. That's the dope thing about general strength training, is just pick the best thing. All right, that's it for this video. Tune in for another one. I have way more to cover, and I try to pack in as much information as I could in this one. I'll see you guys in the next one.